What's going on, listeners? You're listening to Go Shazam Yourself. That's right, you heard correctly. It's not Go Chuck Yourself today, it's Go Shazam Yourself. My name is Chris Gillespie.
My name is Erin.
And we are here, the hosts of what is typically Go Chuck Yourself, to talk about a film that came out in earlier this year, 2019, entitled Shazam, about a young man who gains superpowers, and when he has the powers, he turns into one superhero that is performed by Zachary Levi, who is, of course, the star of Chuck. And this is, although, I don't know, there's Tangled, I guess. He's the lead in Tangled. But I would say for the most part, like, this is Zachary Levi's big screen blockbuster debut.
Yeah, I think this was a huge deal for him to get. Considering, I don't want to get too far ahead of ourselves, but he originally auditioned for the role that Adam Brody plays, which is like a very small part at the end, and then got the lead role. So I think, like, I know that auditioning is hell for everyone, but I think that's a pretty big leap to go from like that kind of bit part at the not to insult Adam Brody's ability or what roles Adam Brody should get, but you know, this is a big deal. This is a major blockbuster. This is like a DC, which I know is not the same as the MCU, but it's like a big deal to be in a superhero movie these days. That's kind of like being in Star Wars.
Yeah, and he was in the MCU briefly, as a very small role.
Oh, right, he was. Yes, he replaced
even
Josh
though he
Dallas.
was supposed to be the in the Thor 1 as that character, but Chuck was taking up his time. So then,
of course,
he was only in Thor 2 and Thor 3. But
briefly.
Yeah, very small role in that.
It's very weird to think about Chuck and Thor filming at the same time. Like,
it is weird.
I know that was happening, but they just feel like in completely different times.
They do.
But we're not talking about Chuck today. Shut up, Chris.
Enough of that talk about Chuck. We're here to talk about Go Shazam Yourself. A few things before we get started. There is a listener survey that is available for you to complete. If you would be so kind. It helps Erin and I get a better feel for what our listeners' thoughts and feelings are about our show Go Chuck Yourself. This is, of course, Go Shazam Yourself. If you have feelings about Go Shazam Yourself, I guess you can put those in the survey too.
Go ahead.
But the link for the survey is going to be in this episode description. It's also in our show description. So whether you can you click on it directly or you copy and paste it into your preferred browser. It's very brief. It's anonymous. I think it's hopefully fun. So
yeah, it's fun. If you like me, which you probably don't, but if you are like me, you may remember Quizilla, which was a very fun website where you could create quizzes. It was kind of like an early precursor to like fanfiction.net and that kind of thing, but there were also quizzes. If you miss that, like I do, hop on. It's still available. You may think that it went away after our last episode, but the survey is still there. You can fill it out whenever you want, but like, do it now while you're thinking about it. Even do it while you're listening to us. Just ignore us. Just fill out the survey.
Judge us in real time. You can start with a score, and then as the episode progresses, be like, I think I'm going to knock that down a peg.
Exactly.
Or maybe you would be like the casting directors for Shazam, and you'll be like, I was going to give them the very small supporting role, but you know what? I think they're lead quality. They're real couple of stars.
Hell yeah. Thanks. Thanks for saying that about us, hypothetical listener. Maybe we'll get cast in Shazam too. The casting director of Shazam is listening to this.
None of this nonsense. We're not going to be in Trolls 2. I don't want to start any campaign about being in Trolls 2.
I mean, we can't be in Trolls 2. That's coming out very soon. We would, if anything, it would be Trolls 3.
Maybe I would not turn away from being in Shazam 2, but I don't think it's going to happen. Anyhow, let's talk about Shazam 1. Shazam 1, you may not know this, or perhaps you do, but it was in development hell for almost 20 years.
I know that.
It was in the works for a long time, like before superhero movies, before the, Iron Man and the start of the MCU, and before like the Dark Knight and, I guess that's not part of the DC extended universe, but Man of Steel or whatever kicked that off. This is way before that.
Long time. Like Man of Steel actually, I don't know if you read this also, but Man of Steel was like one of the many reasons why it couldn't get off the ground initially. So if you think about that, like it was in like pre-production before Man of Steel even came out. And then Man of Steel coming out like messed it up. And that feels like a different era too. Man, if you told me Man of Steel and Chuck happened at the same time, that I'd believe. I think it did though.
I don't think so. I think that might actually not be the case.
Man of Steel came out when I was working at Walmart, which was the summer after our sophomore year. So
yeah, that checks out. It'd be 2013.
Yeah, and then Chuck was like 2011.
Chuck ended in end of 2011,
okay,
early
so
2012.
It's not crazy. You just sounded like I was crazy, but that's not that different.
Okay, maybe they were filming at the same time. Maybe. But yes, they were concerned that Shazam's powers were too similar to Superman's powers, and therefore there was going to be like too many superheroes in the market with the same kind of thing going on. Even though Shazam is pretty different than Superman.
A lot of differences. And also, like, in this movie, they kind of play with that. Like, I know that the climate is a little bit different for how we do superhero movies, but they do kind of play with, like, he's like Superman. He has bullet immunity, and then, like, not to get ahead of ourselves again, but, like, the ending, like, they reference Superman. Like, they can do that because this is in the DCEU.
Rolls off the tongue, that DCEU. But an interesting part about the development hell for Shazam was
I know what you're going to say.
Dwayne Johnson has been associated with the idea of the film for like since the beginning.
Yeah, I think he really wanted it to happen.
He really wanted it to happen. He was either going to be Shazam or he was going to play Shazam's villain, whose name is Black Adam.
Yes, it is.
And Dwayne Johnson is a executive producer on the Shazam film, but he's actually going to be in the standalone Black Adam movie, which is coming out 2 years from now.
Great.
Maybe to the day.
Mark your calendars.
December 2021. Dwayne "The Rock" Johnson will be Black Adam.
I'm looking up Black Adam. I know I was talking big game like I know who that is, but really I just researched this movie. I'm not super familiar with DC as much as I am with Marvel, but he kind of looks like Shazam. Like he's like
evil Shazam.
He's like an evil Shazam, yeah.
Yeah. So that's going to come out, and then presumably there will be another movie that will have Black Adam and Shazam both in it. I know Shazam 2 is supposed to come out like April 2022.
Yep.
Something like that.
I mean, we have time to be in that. We got 3 years. Who knows what our lives will be like at that time?
It's true. But when this movie came out in April of this year, April 2019, it was in theaters at the same time as Captain Marvel, which is funny because Shazam used to be called Captain Marvel until there was a
very confusing to me.
Bitter legal dispute between Marvel and DC about being like, we have a character named Captain Marvel, and Marvel's like, we're fucking called Marvel, sir. They're like, well, he's our character. And then they're like, well, we're going to make Captain Marvel a woman. And they're like, fine, we'll just change the name of our Captain Marvel to Shazam, which is already way catchier and more fun. But it's crazy that Shazam was in theaters overlapping with Captain Marvel, yes, but then also towards the end of its run, Avengers Endgame.
It's so weird.
It's so, like, I was watching this and I'm like, I did not hesitate at all. I mean, I hesitated to go see Endgame because I was rewatching all of those goddamn movies.
Of course.
But I didn't hesitate to see Captain Marvel in theaters. And then once I was completed my my training and my studying for Endgame, I was ready to see that. But I'm like, I can't imagine that there were people like moviegoers that are like, what movie should I see today? And there's 3 superhero movies out at the same time. And you're going to be like, yeah, I want to go to that one. I want to go to the Shazam one. It's such a weird...
I think what you have to think about in that scenario, like, as someone who did that, like, I wanted to see Shazam because it was, like, it purported itself, and to an extent is, different from the mold of, like, the Marvel superhero movie. Because, like, superhero movies didn't, maybe when this was, like, being developed, they didn't have, like, a form, but this is kind of like saying, like, we're breaking the form because it's about a little boy, and, like, it's funny, and you're used to these dark things, like, Thanos just, like, wrecked everybody, and now you get to see, like, a little boy doing, like, boy things. He wants to go to, like, a strip club, and he's, like, trying to find his mom, and that's different. I think DC movies have the reputation, I don't think this is going to be too controversial to say, that, like, DC has the reputation of being not as good, but it has the reputation of being good when it kind of breaks that mold, as opposed to trying to be, like, really dark, like something like Man of Steel, which some people like, but you're having, like, the Zack Snyder, like, really dark things aren't as successful maybe as like something like Wonder Woman or Aquaman, who, like, whether or not you like them, like, they're trying something different. So I think Shazam kind of fit into that mold of, like, it's going to be a little bit funny, it's going to be a little bit irreverent, it's not going to, like, be precious about the superhero brand.
Mm-hmm.
Although it does technically exist in that world. I don't know, I think there was an interest in it.
Well, I would say, based on how it did in the box office, it did very well. Yeah. So there was interest in it. Because it's set during Christmas time.
Yeah, it was kind of weird that it came out in April.
I'm like, this must have been originally slated to come out in, like, November or December at some point, right? Because I feel like April is the least Christmassy time of year. Like, it's not right after Christmas, but it's a little far out from Christmas where you're like, I'm sick of Christmas and all that crap, I'm done with it. But then it's not close enough to Christmas where you're like, I'm getting a little excited for Christmas, but it's also not like the middle of the summer where you're just, like, dying of heat and you're like, oh my God, I wish it was, like, cold out and, like, snow would be nice and having hot cocoa. Like, April is just like, don't come at me with any Christmas crap in April.
Watching it now, I don't know when you watched it, but I watched it last
delightful.
Night. Yeah, it was great. I was like, this is exactly what time of year it is.
I didn't know how Christmassy it was, but I watched it the day that, like, an hour after I put up my Christmas tree and, like, put the decorations up and then sat down and watched Shazam, and it was delightful.
Great.
So speaking of Shazam, we'd like to fill you in about what happens in Shazam. So if you're ready for a plot synopsis, then continue listening. If you do not want to listen to that and you prefer to go watch it on your own, then this is not the show for you. Go ahead and turn that off or pause it. Watch the movie and come back, and then listen to our synopsis of Shazam. I believe, Erin, you are, as is Go Chuck Yourself tradition, you are starting us off?
I am going to start us off. We start with, as Chris and I were discussing this before we began, if you're looking at the Wikipedia synopsis of Shazam, which I am at this time, there is a disproportionately maybe large paragraph describing, like, the beginning scene of the movie, which doesn't really have anything to do with Shazam. I mean, it has things to do with Shazam, but it's not focused on Shazam. It's not focused on Billy Batson. It's focused on Thaddeus Savannah, who is played by Mark Strong when he's an adult, and I may be referring to him as Mark Strong throughout, just to warn you. But it's a flashback to upstate New York in 1971 that is focusing on kind of the villain's origin, I guess. And so if you're looking at the Wikipedia synopsis, it's disproportionately large for a relatively small part of the movie, but it's also, maybe we'll talk about this later, but it's a little bit disproportionately large within the movie. It's really setting up the whole mythology. Like, this is the main, not to get ahead of ourselves again, but when Billy Batson and Shazam do eventually meet, Shazam, the wizard, kind of doesn't explain a ton to Billy. This beginning section is where we get all of the explanation of who Shazam the Wizard is, who the 7 deadly sins are, etc., etc. So, as such, we get a flashback to upstate New York, 1971, where the Savannah family, which are young Thaddeus, who is a little bit of a nerdy boy playing with a magic 8-ball, and then he has the worst dad and brother in the world, all they really do is make fun of him and call him, like, a weak boy and say that he has to, like, grow up and stop playing with his magic 8-ball. And really all they exist to do is just, like, torment Thaddeus. So Thaddeus is, he sees some weird symbols on his magic 8-ball. He gets transported to some like underground, it's called I want to call it the Rock of Ages, but I don't think that's what it's called.
Do you mean the Rock of Eternity?
Yes, that is what I mean. Rock of Ages is something else. He gets transported to a magical temple in another dimension, and he meets a wizard called Shazam, who is the last of the Council of Wizards, which was, I guess, a group of 7 wizards. We don't get a lot of information about them, but Shazam is the last one, and he says that he's searching for someone who is pure of heart to give his powers on, or give his powers to protect the world from the 7 deadly sins. Thaddeus is, I guess, being tested to see if he's pure of heart, but he there's some statues of what we learn are the 7 deadly sins. They start kind of whispering to him to, like, take the eye. He sees this eye, and he pretty much immediately is just like, yeah, okay, I'll take that eye. Which I think a little bit of this is Shazam the Wizard's fault, because if Shazam the Wizard was like, hey, those demons are going to tell you to take that eye, don't do that. But, like, he doesn't know who to listen to. He's just in this weird world. He just got there. Nobody's explaining anything to him.
But that's the point. Shazam doesn't need to explain it to someone who's pure of heart. So it's a test.
Okay.
That's why it's a test. If you told him the answer to the test, then it's not a test.
Imagine this is a job interview. No, that's not good enough. Imagine this is like a psychological evaluation. Say you're going to visit a new therapist, and you walk in, and they're like some kind of experimental therapist, and you know that this is weird. No, maybe this isn't even right. Say you're looking for a new apartment, and you walk into an apartment. There's 2 people in the apartment. One guy says, hey, welcome. I think maybe you might be a good fit to live here, but I want to ask you a few questions. And then the other person who's there says, like, hey, can you get that thing off that table for me? Like, who are you going to listen to? You don't know. You have no context. You don't know that those people are bad. Get the thing off the table and hand it to them. You're just being polite. I think Thaddeus was just being polite.
You started this bit by saying that this was a psychological test on me, but I feel like we really just got more of an insight into your psychology there.
I don't think I'm pure of heart, because I think I would. I just think if you're transported out of a car to another dimension, you have no idea what's going on. Shazam's a little creepy. So, why would you, immediately think he's the one you should trust? Maybe the test is, will you help out these other creepy things? You know?
Yeah, maybe.
Yeah, you
That's
don't
valid.
know. But he chooses wrong. That's the point.
The long and short of it is that he chooses wrong, and Shazam gets very upset with him and then transports him back to the car that he was riding in. Yeah, but time has not passed at all.
Point out what he says, which is, you will never be worthy, to a child. What is he, 10? That's so messed up, Shazam.
I feel like we could do a whole episode just about this 1 10-minute scene. Yeah. But it's so heavy-handed at so many points, because it was as soon as the episode. So after he says, you'll never be good enough, he transports, which is just echoing the same feelings of inadequacy that the father and brother have been projecting onto young Thad his entire life. Yeah. So he gets transported back to the backseat of the car. Time is not gone by. It's a second later, so he's gone to this other dimension, but his dad and his brother think he's just being weird. Yeah. His dad veers off the road, and you think oh, well, that could have been bad, but everyone's fine. They seem like they're okay, and then they jackknife kind of, and then they get hit by a truck.
Yeah, right away.
Was it? I don't know if it was just me or as soon as the scene opened, it was okay, there's a family in a car and it's a flashback. I'm yeah, I've seen television and movies before. I know this leads to a life-altering car accident.
Yeah, it's gonna be bad.
It was it was wintertime too. It's Christmas Eve or something like that. I'm it's icy and they don't like this kid, and and then the wizard's you'll never be good. I'm what? Also, my thing is why is the wizard? How long has he been cycling through people? Yeah, allegedly centuries. That's something
that's not clear. I'll touch on that later.
Why is he so bad at it? And why? I just don't. What? No one. It was I don't know. Maybe I'm thinking too highly of myself. But if I was presented with hey, don't touch the evil orb that the demons are telling you to touch, and I'll turn you into a superhero, I'd be okay, I'm not going to touch the orb.
That's my point. He should say that.
You could just get the vibe from it. This is evil. This whole, and all I'm saying is that I could have been Shazam. That's all I'm saying.
Pure of heart.
I'm pure of heart.
Continue. What about the reason for the season? What about Jesus? Was Jesus not pure of heart? Couldn't Jesus be Shazam? Was Jesus just not around?
That's an extreme example of what I'm saying, but over the course of
Gandhi?
really, we got to 1974 AD. and he got to this kid. Like, how long has he been cycling through people?
Yeah.
And no one can do it.
No one can do it.
But maybe someone can.
Maybe someone can. Maybe he should just look a little bit harder. Shazam.
And in the year 2019.
So, much like the movie, our discussion of that section may be disproportionately large. But moving on, we flash forward to 2019, and we meet Billy Batson, who is a little boy. I mean, he's 14. He's not like a little boy, but he's 14. When we first meet him, he is hanging out outside of a pawn shop, which he has called the cops because someone has broken into, supposedly. Once the cops go in to investigate, he locks them in, and he uses their police scanner to... I'm sure this makes sense if you know exactly what he's doing, but I was a little bit unclear that he, like, looks up someone's license plate to get their address, but I don't know why he had their license plate in the first place, because what he's doing is he's trying to find his mother, who, Billy is a foster child who's we find out, got separated from his mother as a really young child. I guess he didn't know his mother's first name, so he's looking for women and men in the Philadelphia area who have the last name Batson. So he uses the police scanner to do this. He finds someone named Rachel Batson's address. That's the point of this scene. We also learn that he's a little bit cheeky because he kind of talks back to the cops once he's locked them in this pawn shop, and he steals one of the cops' lunches. Little rascal. So he travels to Rachel Batson's house and finds out that is not his mother. Did you like this scene?
Yeah, it was fine.
Yeah, it was fine. It's not his mom.
Yeah, you're like, oh, that's disappointing.
Yeah. We have a little flashback to a winter carnival in Philadelphia where Billy's mom, who is very young, is trying to win him a prize at the carnival, but she only wins. He wants a tiger, but she only wins a compass. She gives him the compass so he can find his way home. Almost immediately, he drops the compass and loses her, and then goes to the cops say, your mom will come back, but when we find out that she didn't come back, so he's a foster child now. Bad parenting, a theme of this movie so far. And it will continue a little bit, but there are some good parents who we are about to meet. Billy has a very harsh conversation with his social worker. Did you pick up why are the adults in the first half of this movie so harsh? She's like, Billy, your mom doesn't want you. I don't think... I get tough love and everything, but I don't think you should say that to a 14-year-old child who is, had a really rough go of it. So Billy has been to a large number of foster homes and that he's run away from in the search of his mom. He gets assigned to another foster home, which is run by Victor and Rosa Vasquez. There's 5 other children. Mary is kind of she's about to go to college. She's very smart. There's Pedro, who doesn't say a lot. There's Eugene, who's a computer hacker. There's Darla, who's just the cutest person in the world. And then there's Freddie, who is a superhero enthusiast. And Billy moves in with them, and he's none too enthused. He doesn't really believe in families. He only believes in his relationship with his mother. Here's something I want to ask you, just related to that flashback. Do you remember, probably not, but do you remember how old you were when you, knew your parents had names?
No, I do not, but that was interesting, because I was thinking, at first when I was watching the movie, I was like, oh, come on, he doesn't know the name. Why would he not know that? I'm like, no, I guess if he was really little and he just didn't know.
Yeah,
that's an interesting moment of, child psychology that they're exploring there. Just no, he doesn't know the parent's name.
Yeah, that. I mean, that scene was horrifying. I feel like that was a legitimate fear I had as a kid. Every time I lost my mom in the grocery store, I was like, I'll never find her again. I think as time goes on, so what, if he's 14 now, this would have been happening in 2005, as time goes on, this gets a little iffier, because I feel like if this happened right now, people have social media and stuff, I feel like with the internet it would be harder to lose a child and never find them. We find on her end maybe not, but he could find her on Facebook maybe. So anyway, I had another question. I had another note. One of the things Freddie says is that he tells Billy that the Vasquez's nice demeanor is on an act, and it gets real Game of Thrones around there. And when this was when this movie came out, Game of Thrones was still happening. But do you think this joke still works? Do you think people still know what Game of Thrones is?
Yeah, I don't know. It's really hard to say. What, 8 months after Game of Thrones ended? Yeah, I think it was just a little show that a lot of people have forgotten by now.
Well, everybody
just such a
tried
niche
to
thing.
write it out of their minds, I feel like. Everybody's like, oh, well, that's over. Like, we don't have to think about it ever again.
Freddie is disabled, so he kind of has a, he's got a big imagination. He's really into superheroes because this is a universe where Superman and Batman both exist in real life. So he's all about that, which is cool.
And they may have fought each other at some point in the recent past. They probably
fought each other and destroyed a city. And so he's really into superheroes and kind of really knowledgeable about that subject matter.
We are introduced to this family, then we're introduced to Billy's new school. Something that I wonder, and maybe you wondered too, and maybe you, the audience, wondered, is why these kids of vastly different ages go to a school together? This is
television in the movies, Erin.
I've never seen this in a movie before.
Yeah, I feel like they just throw a bunch of kids of different ages into the same school and call it like
Darla is like 5,
a junior high school or something, or a middle school.
That's not okay. I don't know how
maybe
things
they
work
have
in
different.
Philly.
Maybe they have different wings and they all share a communal lunch. Okay, maybe it's a little weird that all of them are at the same school. I will concede that it's a little strange. Because you have like a high school senior to Darla, who seems to be in like the 2nd grade. Yeah. Maybe it's just all the grades in this one school.
Yeah, okay. So that's, one of those Philly schools where everybody is there. So we find out, we move back to Thaddeus Savannah Mark Strong, whatever you want to call him, who we find out has been researching this, the Rock of Eternity, other people who have been tested. And he finally learns that the symbols that he saw are some kind of code to open up a door to that place. So he finds out the sequence that he needs, and he opens a door in his office. The woman lead scientist who he has been working with, who is actually played by the wife of the director of this movie, she realizes that she's like she thought that they were researching mass hysteria, but in fact, like, they were researching a real thing. She immediately dies, so it doesn't really matter. She touches the door and burns up. Whatever.
It was really disturbing.
Yeah, it was really disturbing. But the point of the scene is that Mark Strong returns to the Rock of Eternity, and he goes back for that eye. He's been thinking about that eye. He puts it right in his own eye. He puts it right in his face, and then he gets like the statues that were the 7 deadly sins go into his body. He has superpowers now. He's like, hey, Shazam, you messed up. You should have, whatever. You don't have a champion, and I am the champion of the bad people now.
Yeah, the Shazam the Wizard is still sitting there being like, oh, couldn't find a champion. Oh, well.
Yep.
And then Mark Strong walks in and just becomes a evil supervillain immediately. And even then, the Wizard basically has to scramble.
Yes, that is... And apparently, what we learn in this scene, I thought that he was always testing kids to see if they're pure of hearts, but it seems when they're interviewing people that there's people of different ages who it happened to them, like, recently. So I guess he's just testing whoever. Why couldn't he test them as kids? If he tested them as kids, he could get in on the ground floor. Shazam, get better at this. Use Simply Higher or whatever. Use Indeed. Are you pure of heart? Apply at Shazam, the Rock of Eternity.
I use ZipRecruiter for all my superhero championing needs.
Yeah, that would be a really good ad. ZipRecruiter, please pay us.
So anyhow, the wizard Shazam is in a predicament where he's like, oh shit, there's a villain now, and the 7 deadly sins, which I don't know, struck me as a little biblical in my mind. Well,
Jesus. It should be Jesus.
Jesus should be Shazam. Yeah. He's the champion fighting the 7 deadly sins. But we're at the school, and Billy is having a tough time. He doesn't really want to hang out with any of the other kids from his foster family, and he ends up saving Freddie, who's getting beat up by some stereotypical bullies. I know bullying is a problem, and it has always been a problem, and it will probably always be a problem, and that breaks my heart. But I'm sorry to laugh at that.
That was very genuine, Chris.
The stereotypical depiction of bullies in media, I always think is funny because I think it's ridiculous because it's always like, I'm like, it's so stupid that bullies exist in the first place that I don't know.
Well,
I don't know where I'm going with this.
Thaddeus's father and brother at the beginning are like the worst father and brother in the world. These are like the worst children in the world. Like they're like
right.
They drive
they're
their
like
truck, they park it
and
on the curb. I don't even know like why does anyone allow that? Why isn't their truck towed?
So Billy is fighting off these guys because he's got a little bit more street smarts, and they end up chasing him out of the school and onto the subway. He escapes from the bullies, and he's riding the subway, and as I wish every day when I'm riding the subway to and from work, he is magically transported to another dimension. Since I've seen this movie, I've been riding the subway, and I'm like, maybe today's the day. Maybe today's the day I get turned into a superhero.
That'd be nice. Chris, I think we're learning some things about your psychology as well. Seems
yes,
like
we are.
You really want to be a superhero.
What an exciting bonus episode this is for everyone. So he gets teleported to the Rock of Eternity, and he meets Shazam the Wizard, and Shazam the Wizard gives him like a really brief version of the spiel, not like the really long, extensive one that he gave Baby Thad, but he's basically like, yo, I need a superhero. I guess I'm dying, or there's a villain, so you're the only person that can do this because you've kind of fought off some bullies, but not really, because he just ran away, and it's gonna be like a recurring problem, but I really am kind of in a tough spot, so I guess it'll have to be you. So he gives Billy his staff, and he says that all of his magic powers will be transferred to Billy as soon as Billy holds the staff and says the wizard's name. And then Billy asks what the wizard's name is, and he says Shazam, and then Billy laughs and then kind of mutters Shazam, or like awkwardly says it, and then all of a sudden is beamed up in a massive like lightning bolt, and he gets all of the powers, which there's a lot of the movie is dedicated to figuring out what Freddy's powers, or not Freddy, but Billy's powers are as Shazam. But they're basically electricity manipulation, near invulnerability, super strength, speed, and eventually flight. So he's kind of like Superman, but he doesn't have like the ice breath or the laser vision or things like that, but pretty similar. He's got a cape, and when Billy is transported back down to the ground as a super version of himself, he is Zachary Levi as Shazam. And I was so happy to see a friendly face in this movie.
Yeah, Zachary Levi's really, like, I feel like, I mean, it is kind of the point, like, for when he gets the superheroes, for you to say, like, wow, things are picking up now. But it was really nice to be like, oh, that's someone I know. Like, we're in good hands now. This is going to be fun.
And so Zachary Levi as Shazam is performing as a superhero who's also a teenage kid. And I think there's a lot of overlap in the performance between his rendition of Shazam and Chuck.
Yeah,
because they're both kind of like
now too.
Not man children, but average guys who are all of a sudden have this crazy power and thrust into a new world with new responsibility.
Yeah, and trying to
it's
figure
kind of over their heads.
Like what? Like they have this duty that they have to fulfill without like enough information, and there's like people who understand more who are trying to explain it to like there's a lot of similarities. I think it was very interesting, and I see why he was well equipped for this role.
He was. His time as Chuck really served him well in this role, because it was like there's like an inherent goofiness to both of them.
Yes.
But they're both good at being serious, and they can be earnest, but it's also they have that good comedic timing. And so the whole thing with Shazam is that he switches between being Shazam and Billy by saying Shazam. Mm-hmm. So he doesn't know that at first, so he goes back to the house and kind of meets up with Freddy. But he's Zachary Levi, and everyone's concerned that an adult man is coming around to this foster home.
But Freddy is pretty excited about it. Once Freddy gets over his shock, he's like, sweet, like my friend is a superhero.
So they begin kind of doing what you would think that, young teenagers would do with superpowers.
Chris as an adult man would do.
They kind of take YouTube videos of Shazam testing out his powers and learning how to do things. He doesn't really do anything heroic. He starts like doing party tricks and like panhandling for money on the street and performing.
His one like brush with heroism is when he hears someone screaming and he runs over to help, thinking that a woman is being mugged, but in fact the woman was threatened with mugging and instead sprayed a man in the face with pepper spray, and he's the one who is screaming. And then the woman like is afraid of Shazam and gives him money, or is afraid of Billy and gives him money. So that's when he learns, oh, I can get paid for this.
Yes. In a universe where, once again, Superman and Batman exist, there's an immense novelty around there being a superhero that does like fun stuff.
Yes.
And people don't really know what to make of Shazam. Billy's kind of enjoying his alter ego. Freddy's enjoying it as well. It really brings them closer together. Billy starts skipping school. Not cool, kids. Stay in school.
Any children listening to Go Chug Yourself / Go Shazam Yourself, please stay in school.
Eventually, Billy kind of gets too much into being Shazam, so he is getting a little cocky and he starts moving away from Freddy because he thinks Freddy's jealous that he doesn't have the Shazam powers. And Billy ends up doing something stupid where he like shoots lightning out of his chest and accidentally hits a bus on the other side of town.
Yeah, he does.
So
one of
he
the
kind of
does.
Thrusted into a moment of actually having to be a hero and trying to figure out how to rescue people from this bus that is about to fall off the side of the overpass. And he struggles to do that and eventually does it somewhat safely because he finds out that he's invincible. And then there's news cameras and everything. And because of him being on the news, Mark Strong, aka Thad, aka Savannah, see him on the TV, and he flies over and confronts him and tells Shazam not to get in his way of what he's going to do, or he wants Shazam's powers or something to that effect. And then Savannah realizes that Billy or Shazam, for whatever reason, knows Freddy, so he decides to capture Freddy to use him as a pawn against Shazam. And then from there, Freddy takes Savannah to the foster home where, you know, Savannah captures the rest of the foster kids.
Yeah, the rest of the kids.
So it's kind of a bad situation now. Shazam is actually going to have to be a hero and save his foster family. But he finds out as he's trying to distance himself from his foster family that they were actually trying to help him find his biological mother. And he gets an address and a name, and he goes to her address, and he ends up finding his biological mother living in a large apartment building somewhere in Philadelphia. Yeah, she's 2 subway
stops away is the important part. Like, she's very, very close.
Very, very close. And so he knocks on her door, and she opens it, and it's the same woman from the flashback at the carnival that, you know, was Billy's mom. And he is really emotional, and he returns the compass, or he has the compass that she gave him initially on that day. And she's very confused to see him. She's kind of like not super into it, surprisingly.
Yeah, it's a very genuinely depressing scene. Like, it's very sad.
It's very awkward and very strange. And he explains like, no, I'm here. Like, I found you. I've been searching this whole time. And then she's basically like, oh, yeah, like I'm not really into you. And she explains that when she and Billy got separated at the carnival, she was like relieved, and then decided that because she was a young mother that she said she was 17 at the time, and she thought that he would have a better life without her, because his father they were from another state, I think maybe Michigan or something, Minnesota, one of those states, and his father wanted nothing to do with him and ended up in jail, and she was a young mother raising him on her own, and she kind of knew, she knew where he was all along, but she wasn't really interested. While he was looking for her, she was not looking for him. No, and she is not interested in developing a relationship with him, even now that he is in front of her. So it is kind of revealed that she's in some kind of dysfunctional relationship, and Billy very easily is able to let this go, and he returns the compass to her.
Lets it go?
Yeah.
I thought he was crushed.
I think he was
so sad.
He was like sad, and then he was like, whatever, I'm going to go return to my real family, which...
Well, okay, he does say that.
You're like, whoa, you were having these feelings about your foster family this whole time? Because he has some bonding with some of the other characters.
Well, I think what the movie is trying to imply is that, like, he has some moments with his sister, like, or Mary, the older foster sister, just got into college, and she's been struggling because she doesn't want to leave her family behind, and Billy's advice to her is, like, you're only responsible for yourself, just focus on yourself. But his foster siblings did this kind of selfless things for him, like are trying to protect him from Mark Strong and are trying to help him find his mother and everything. So he sees that, like, his mother, who was like the paragon of parenting in his mind, is like not actually as much there for him as his, like, quote unquote real family, who is his foster family. So I think,
I'm saying that he's able to process all of this immediately as he's walking down the hallway.
14-year-old boys are famous for processing things well.
Being so emotionally intuitive.
Yes.
So he's leaving that, and he's like, whatever, I'm good. And then he gets a call on probably like Freddy's cell phone or something like that, and it's actually Savannah, and it's Savannah announcing that he's taking all of the foster kids hostage. So Billy has no choice but to show up as Shazam, and it's really cool because he like goes up to the top of the apartment building and then jumps off and says Shazam midair. It turns into Shazam and then flies away.
Cool scene.
That was very cool. And then he arrives at the house, and they have a moment where Savannah wants to take all of them to the Rock of Eternity, where the wizard staff is being held because that's what transfers the powers. And so all of Billy as Shazam and all the foster kids go into the Rock of Eternity, and the demons are let loose. Also, we did not talk about the scene where Savannah takes out his revenge on his dad and his brother. Don't worry about it.
Whatever. There's like a brutal scene where he kills a bunch of people. It's fine.
I think it's disturbing. So something that I think about this movie is that there's a lot of different tones going on, and I feel like that was a part of a tone where it was like really dark and strangely violent in a way that I felt like was
the first time I saw that
with
scene,
everything else.
Pretty disturbed, pretty upset.
I just think it's disturbing because it's like ostensibly a lot of innocent people who are brutally killed by these horrific demons.
Yeah,
and also getting thrown out of a building. It just felt like unearned. But then there's like the dad who's left. He's like in a wheelchair because he's paralyzed from the car accident, and he gets mauled by another demon.
Yep.
Anyhow, so these are the demons. They're scary.
Yeah, they're scary.
All 7 sins. They live in Savannah's body, and he summons them whenever he wants, and they kind of look like the monsters from Ghostbusters.
Yeah, I guess so.
They're scary, but also like not that scary, but pretty scary. And so yeah, as they are in the Rock of Eternity and all the demons are out of Savannah's body, Freddy throws a batarang that he has, a souvenir batarang, at Savannah, and actually ends up cutting him in the head, which is strange because he's supposed to be invincible. Yeah. But then they realize that he actually becomes, I guess, vincible, or able to be hurt.
Vulnerable,
vincible.
Same one of those words, V words.
When all of the demons are outside of his body. And and then they escape somehow because they were able to. They're trapped there by Savannah, and then they talk about like, well, Billy, how did you get out of here the first time when you were stuck here? And he's like, oh, I just like wished I was back on the subway, or like I was envisioning I was on the subway. So then they ask them. They try to figure out someplace to envision where they want to go.
And Billy, what does he envision, Chris?
Billy envisions that he goes to a strip club, which is something that he's been doing as a grown man, a superhero. He and Freddy have been going to a strip club, so he and all of his foster siblings are magically transported to the nearby strip club.
Oh yeah!
And from there, they run to a winter carnival that is in full swing.
And you know what carnival might it be? It's the carnival from the beginning of the film. It's the same carnival. It's the Philadelphia Winter Carnival. It's it reminds me of a good episode of Chuck versus the Gravitron. And Santa Claus is there, which reminds me of another good episode of Chuck versus Santa Claus. So, take your pick. A lot of similarities to Chuck.
They're everywhere.
So the carnival is kind of the crux of the movie. We have everybody's there. There's Santa's there, the bullies are there on the Ferris wheel spitting at people. That'll come into play later. All the foster kids are there, and a big fight ensues. Mark Strong arrives, and he unleashes the sins onto like all the innocent people at the carnival who scatter First, they're excited to see Shazam, but they're not excited to see the sins. Shazam starts battling what is apparently wrath. I think maybe someone is able to categorize which sin is which, but more on that later, but I was not. But according to Wikipedia, Shazam starts battling wrath, and his siblings are captured by the other sins.
It works out because there ends up being a appropriate number of sins to the number of siblings.
Yeah, that's actually pretty good planning on the part of this movie.
It's like it was written out ahead of time.
Yep. So, Shazam, Billy, steals the staff from Savannah. He processes a lot of information pretty quickly and seems to figure out that if his siblings put their hands on the staff and say his name, then they will also turn into Shazams. Or wizards, whatever you want to call them.
Wizard superhero champions.
That's not exactly where, like, that... I don't know if I would have understood it to mean that, and I was pretty confused about why that was allowed, because the wizard could have just given his powers to a bunch of people. I don't know about any of this. I'm sure it makes a lot of sense in the comic if you've read the comic, but whatever. They say, and there's kind of a cute scene where he's like, say my name, and they go, Billy, and nothing happens because you gotta say Shazam. So then they say Shazam, and then they all turn into superheroes, and it's very cute. They seem to be like an amalgamation, like each one has a specific power, as opposed to Shazam, Zachary Levi, who has all the powers. So like Darla is super fast, Pedro is super strong, etc., etc. And we get to see Adam Brody, who is Freddy's alter ego, which is, I thought, really good casting. Like, I think Zachary Levi would have been good as like an alternate Freddy, but like Adam Brody, great casting. It's exciting to see him. You know, you love to see it, Chris.
I didn't know him from anything, so I am confused why.
I have been discussing with others recently what we're going to do when we run out of road with Chuck, and the OC is another show that we could cover. So,
good Lord,
you'll get to see a lot of Adam Brody then.
I have not agreed to anything like that.
Well, we'll talk about it after the show. But so the fight ensues. Every sin fights every sibling. The bullies are rescued from the Ferris wheel that they have been in, but Freddy is the one who rescues them. Freddy can fly now, and he gives them both what are called suitcase wedgies as he flies them away from danger. Which is fun, because he kind of gets his revenge, but he also proves that he also is pure of heart by, like, rescuing them, even though they've been really mean to him. Shazam eventually lures Savannah up to a roof. Eventually, there's a showdown up in the air. Savannah and Shazam are both flying. There's kind of a cute scene where Savannah is making, like, a classic villain speech, but Shazam is really far away from him and can't hear anything he's saying. He just sees him, like, yelling and gesturing. It's very cute. But finally, they have a showdown on the roof of a building where Shazam reveals that Savannah has one sin left in him, and it's the one that has characterized his entire life. Of course, you know, envy. We know that. He's been envious this whole film. It's not a surprise. It's not confusing. He's envy. That's his sin. And Shazam kind of provokes envy into leaving Savannah's body, so Savannah almost falls to his death, but he manages to, Shazam, once he defeats envy, manages to rescue Mark Strong. So again, he's pure of heart. He rescues someone who is mean to him. But, you know, Mark Strong is harmless now, because he no longer has any demons inside him. The siblings defeat all the other demons, and the carnival applauds. Everyone at the carnival sees that they are safe, and they applaud all these superheroes, which I thought was a nice scene, but it's a little weird considering that there's, like, a motionless Mark Strong at these, like, superheroes' feet. Like, they presumably just, like, murdered this man, and his body is still there, and everybody's like, woo, yeah! Woo-hoo!
I was more caught off guard. I'm like, why are there still people here?
I mean,
that's a good point. They should all flee.
Yeah.
They're like, oh, it's like if it's raining when you're at a carnival, and you're like, oh, we'll just ride it out. It'll be okay. Well, we'll get a little wet, but we'll be fine. Like, oh, there's a supervillain here, but like, we'll just like chill for a little while. We'll like go sit at the restaurant and have a snack.
And like the weird thing is, Jill is there and like the Fulcrum agent, and they're just like, hey, like, we love carnivals. We're just at every carnival. We're just carnival hopping around the country. So the movie ends back at the really strange all ages school. Freddie earlier in the movie made a comment to everyone that he was friends with Shazam, and everybody made fun of him that no, he wasn't. But all of the foster kids get together at a lunch school table, and who should walk in but Billy as Shazam? And he's like, yes, I have been friends with Freddie this whole time. And Freddie's really excited about this. This would kind of mortify me. Everyone, I would be so embarrassed if someone came in and was like, hey, look at her, everyone. I'm friends with her. But the last shot of the movie is that Shazam says he's brought a friend. And which friend is it? It's Superman. And Freddie's like, woo! But we don't see Superman's face, so it could be anyone. It could be Henry Cavill. It could be whoever else.
Henry Cavill's stunt double, who is actually who is Superman in the Shazam.
It could be Henry Cavill with a mustache, Henry Cavill without a mustache.
Because they cut off his. They don't show his head.
Yeah, they don't show his head. So it could
it's a clever way of doing it. It's funny.
Also, when did Shazam meet Superman? When is this scene set?
Yeah, I was confused. I'm like, how?
A lot of questions, but it's a good moment. It's a good redemptive moment for Billy. It's a good redemptive moment for Freddie. Everyone, they prove that they're cool and they're a family.
They're a cool family that, by the way, also all have superpowers now.
Yeah, well, that's kind of unclear. Do they all get to keep it? If they say Shazam at any time, do they get to still be Shazam, or is it only when they're touching the staff? Is it only? I
was under the impression that they just have it now. Was my understanding.
Okay, maybe that's true.
But the foster parents don't know.
So that's the end of the movie. We get a little after credits scene, if you're interested in that, where Savannah is in jail, and who should come and talk to him? But a little worm. It's a little worm. His name is Mr. Mind. I don't think he says that, but that's his name, and I was very excited to see him.
Yes, he's like, oh, I will help you extract revenge against Shazam. And you're like, who's saying this? And you see a little caterpillar.
Worm. It's like Richard. Is Richard Scarry the one who has a worm and an apple?
Yes,
Hell
it is.
Yeah, Richard Scarry. Okay.
Busy town.
So we have conquered Shazam. We haven't conquered Shazam. Shazam's still at large, but we have discussed Shazam. And now I'd like to move us into a little further discussion. Chris, what do you think about the relationship between Shazam and Chuck?
I think, as we discussed, the performance of Chuck definitely groomed Zachary Levi to be a very strong performer in this role, especially because I think that must have been evident when he was auditioning to play adult Freddy, and they were like, holy shit, this guy's good. Let's put him on the other track. I think, little part of me was hoping that when they the whole family turned into adults, I was like, it'd be sweet if it was like Sarah and Casey. And
that would have actually been really cool.
It would be like, why is this all of a sudden a Chuck movie? But I thought the relationship between Freddy and Shazam was similar to Morgan and Chuck.
Damn it. Okay. Well, my note, which is phrasing that a little bit differently, is Shazam is friends with a child just like Chuck is friends with a child.
Oh, burn. Burn.
But yeah, I think that's absolutely true. I mean, I think Freddy is, as a child, is a little bit more redeemable than Morgan is, and I don't think he does anything as egregious. But it is kind of interesting to see this.
Because the whole dynamic of Freddy being like, "Oh, I'm really excited to be your friend," and then you're kind of being distant from me, or you don't value me as much as I value you, and you're so much cooler because not that Morgan knows about the intersect yet, but that he has this kind of, I don't know.
Yeah, I think that's absolutely true. That started out really eloquent and then it kind of petered out, but that just proves it's time for me to talk. But yeah, I think that's absolutely true. I think a lot of the acting beats that Zachary Levi hits, like facial expressions, kind of line readings, are similar to, felt very of a piece with how Chuck talks and how Chuck would hit certain lines. I think the situation, even though it's sci-fi, science fiction, science computers versus magic superheroes, even though those two things are divergent, I think it's a very similar theme. I think the only beats that weren't that similar were there's a little bit of I don't know if it's exactly a darkness, but Billy as a, like, the actor playing Billy as a child and, like, the character of Billy in general, like, had, maybe it's, like, more modern or something. Like, there were certain things that I feel like Chuck wouldn't say. Like, when he said, like, when Shazam would say, like, use, like, man at the end of sentences, or, like, for example, when he was flossing. He was flossing at one point, not flossing his teeth, but flossing, doing a little dance.
Like the kids do.
Yeah, like the kids do. I think there were some interesting beats to see that, like, having watched a lot of Chuck, it was interesting to see, like, Zachary Levi making some different choices, maybe to be similar to this child actor and, like, be of a piece with that. But it must be interesting to play someone else, like an adult version of someone else, like, to take on those mannerisms while also, like, using your own mannerisms and making your own acting choices. And I thought he did a really good job, and I was really, like, happy with his performance.
I was proud. I felt very proud. I was like, that's my kid out there.
It was like seeing our son.
Seeing our son in a big DC superhero movie.
If only. Maybe one day. Not our son. Like, my son. Maybe my child will be in a DC superhero movie.
There's a lot being discussed about the future, which I do not understand right now.
Well, we're going to have a foster family. We're going to adopt a bunch of foster kids.
That would be fine. Yeah. We can do that.
Yeah.
That is an acceptable way of going about that situation. As we do here at Go Shazam Yourself, we have a segment that we do every week called Shazam, Marry, Kill, where we take one part of this movie that we want to marry and one part of this movie that we want to kill. Erin, would you like to announce your Shazam Marry first?
Oh, I would love to. So I have a couple things that I really liked. One of the more general things is just, I did really like seeing all the kids turn into adults. Like, I thought that was really cute, and that was the first time I saw it completely unexpected. This may happen in the comic, which I have not read, but I thought it was surprising and cute and something that we don't usually see. Like, I would expect to see the kids, like, helping Shazam out, but I didn't expect to see a lot of Shazams. And it was cool to see everybody's alter adult ego. But the thing I specifically want to highlight, my main Mary, that's kind of like my, like, other, like, my ex-wife, maybe, that I loved, but I no longer. It's been, what I love more now is kind of like a very, I don't want to say throwaway, but like a very quick joke. I don't know if you even noticed it, but there's a scene where they're at the top of the steps featured in Rocky, because they're in Philly, so they're at, I haven't seen Rocky, so this is not gonna, that building that Rocky runs up. And Zachary Levi says, I get why Rocky was training to get up here. And I thought that was cute, because, like, even I, not having seen Rocky, know that, like, he wasn't training to get up those steps. He was, like, training to be, like, wrestling and fighting, or boxing. He was training to do what Rocky does. He wasn't, like, so this joke really worked for me, even though I don't understand it. That's my Mary. I like he says Rocky was training to get up here, because he wasn't. Chris, what would you marry?
For my Mary, I would like to highlight a little scene that takes place during the sequence where Billy is having fun being an adult and Freddy is having fun knowing an adult who is basically a kid. So that's a lot of them, like
they buy
beer,
yeah,
which is funny, and buying their own snacks. They also, we didn't talk about this, but they rob an ATM machine and then buy like thousands of dollars worth of electronics.
Oh, yeah, why not?
It's just stolen. That's stolen. He's not pure of heart. He just stole all that shit.
Yeah, well, he was Shazam
and
Wizard's
the foster
last
parents
choice.
never realize, like, oh, where'd all this stuff come from? They just don't see it. They had like a lot of stuff. Anyhow, a nice version of this, or a funny version of this, is when there's kind of a weird Ferris Bueller's Day Off moment where Zachary Levi as Shazam poses as Freddy's father, but he's wearing a big trench coat to cover up the Shazam suit. And they have an exchange with a security guard while Shazam is dismissing Freddy from school, which was very endearing and awkward and funny in many ways. And it was a nice little comedic scene.
Yeah, I thought that was cute too. Would you like me to go first on my kill?
Go for it.
Okay, so I had a couple things. I think major issue with this is just that I didn't understand some of the like mechanics of how Shazam works, how the villain works, how the sins work. I think one of the bigger issues within that is just like they made such a big deal, like they took the time to highlight, like Mark Strong says to his father, like, your sin has always been greed, and then greed kills him, and like they're like, Mark Strong's sin has always been envy, and like those things you can kind of extrapolate once they're said, but I don't think Mark Strong's problem as presented was necessarily envy. It was like, if anything for me, it was closer to pride, that he feels like inadequate and he's like trying to prove that he is adequate. So I wasn't really clear on how the sins worked and what they had to do with anything. And I'm sure those are just like comic book characters, so you have to use them to some extent, but like, I was unclear on what exactly they did, and also like what Mark Strong's powers having them were. He flew. He seemed to have the same powers as Shazam, but that seems weird that like Shazam and the Sins would have the same exact powers. On a smaller level, I think like the characterization and ages of the children just got a little bit confusing at points, where like, I guess a 14-year-old would be interested in, like, a strip club, like, trying out, like, a strip club and beer and, like, those kinds of things. I've never been a 14-year-old boy, so I don't know. But I think, like, at points, they seemed, like, more like maybe 10. And then at other points, they seemed, like, as we were saying, like, very emotionally mature. So I think the ages and maturity of the characters sometimes got a little iffy. And I think that, you know, Shazam could have just done better. Like, the wizard Shazam, not Zachary Levi Shazam, but, like, he could have found, like, I don't know, why was it Billy? Like, that was the thing that bothered me the first time I saw it. Like, Billy's just his last resort, that's the last one. And if he is the last one, like, make that clear how this process has been working. Like, we just see him throw some sparks in the air and, like, go find someone who's pure of heart. But, like, why do these sparks suck so bad? Like, I don't know. I think there was some mechanical information that was foregone for the purpose of, like, cool fights and like funny scenes, and I like the cool fights and funny scenes, but I think there could have been a little bit more development so I had my footing in this world.
Yeah, I think that's definitely pretty spot on. I would say if I had to kill something, I would kill the the signature DC superhero movie never ending third act, which is a massive fight scene that goes on for what feels like way too long and has a lot of anticlimaxes, which I think they intend to build suspense, but if anything, I feel like suspense just kind of gets lessened over each anticlimax, because there's like 3 different points during the big final fight scene where you're like, oh, I bet this is going to be it. Like, this is, even because like I thought that when all the kids got the powers, that was going to be like the tide turning and be like, all right, now they're going to kick some butt. But then there was still like a decent amount of time after that, and then there was the whole Shazam and Savannah have their showdown, and I don't know, I just felt like the third act kind of dragged on, could have been a little bit tighter. It felt like the structuring of this movie was kind of weird. I guess. Yeah, I agree. The second act was appropriately long, but it's strange because it was like the things that you could typically think of taking place in a first act are kind of dragged out to also be in the second act. And by that, I mean like establishing the character, establishing the stakes, or establishing the journey, or establishing the villain. All these things are kind of thrown into the second act, and then the third act happens and it's just like big fight that goes on for 25 minutes. And you are not the only person to think that, because that is in a lot of the reviews. I think that is a common critique of DC superhero movies. I didn't see Justice League or the Batman versus Superman movie, but I saw Man of Steel, and it was a similar kind of third act where it was just like, oh my god, this just keeps going and going. And that had a whole separate, like, they didn't do the DC thing of like, let's build a giant CGI city which we slowly destroy over 20 minutes in the third act. I felt like this time they didn't, you know, they weren't, the carnival was cool and a fun thing to mess around with and destroy, but they didn't like destroy Philadelphia in any kind of over dramatic, over the top way, which was good. I felt like it was more contained. So I would say yeah, the structuring specifically with the third act was not my cup of tea.
Yeah, I think that's fair. Do you think that the carnival was better utilized in Shazam than it was in Chuck versus the Gravitron?
I don't know. I'd say both instances are probably like the writers or creators being like, I would really like to do a scene at a carnival. Okay, well, how do we incorporate a carnival into this?
There was a weird thing at this carnival that, I haven't been to carnivals in Philly, so maybe this is a thing, and I apologize to our Philadelphia listeners if it is, but they had, like, it was like a fishing thing. Like, it was like an ice skating rink, but, like, with water under it, where, like, Mark Strong is trying to drown Billy in it, and, like, I don't really know how ice skating rinks work, but I don't think there's, like,
They're not usually like ponds.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's just a sheet.
It wasn't a pond. Like, it was like a man-made thing. So I don't know what this was. And then I saw a sign that said something to do with fishing. So I don't know what this was, but that was weird.
Well, why don't you say we give this a couple of scooter scale rankings? Scooter Shazam scale rankings?
Okay.
Shazam scale?
What character could we name this after? The security guard is named Mr. Moran. We could call it I think he's really the standout character. So we could call it a Moran scale.
The Moran scale?
Yeah.
You know what? That's fine by me. Yeah. So on the Moran scale, we're going to give the 0 to 5 flashlights to determine what we feel about this movie.
Yeah, perfect.
So I will start off by saying I will give this movie 3.5 flashlights out of 5.
Wow, that's pretty good.
I enjoyed this movie. I wasn't like, this is a great movie, or like, this is a really great entry into the superhero canon. Mm-hmm. I really enjoyed Zachary Levi's performance. Mm-hmm. I enjoyed Asher Angel, who plays Billy, and Jack Dylan Grazer.
Also cute kid.
Who plays Freddy.
Yeah, they were good.
All the performances were really good. Thought the writing was kind of fun, aside from like the big structural things. Mm-hmm. At points, the tone of it was kind of confusing to me, because I felt like at points it was like a high budget Disney Channel original movie in terms of what the content was and what was going on. I was like, I could see this as a DCOM. Having
been watching Descendants this whole week, I can attest to that.
But with weird elements of like sudden darkness and violence, I'm like, that seems kind of odd. Yeah, obviously things I didn't understand about the logic of the characters and superpowers and things like that. So yeah, I enjoyed it. It was a nice time. I wouldn't go out and be like, hey everyone, you have to go watch this movie, even though we're doing a podcast about it. I wouldn't recommend it.
Well, listen to our podcast about it. This is better.
Seek it out again. So I give it 3.5.
Okay, this is gonna be one of those rare instances when I'm lower than you.
Okay.
I'm gonna give it a 3. So not.
Well, this is your second viewing of it too, so.
Yes. I would say on my first viewing of it, I would have been closer to like 3.75, maybe even a 4. I did really enjoy it the first time I saw it, just because it is different from like a lot of, because at the time that I had seen this, I had probably seen Captain Marvel and Endgame, or was about to, and this is kind of doing something different, so I applaud it for that. I think that on a repeat viewing, I think like some of the things we're talking about, the structural issues, the tonal issues, the confusion was a little bit more pronounced for me. So I think it's above average. I think the acting was good. I think you're right, the writing was fun. I liked a lot of the jokes. I like this idea, I like the idea of Shazam, because there's not other superheroes like that, and I think there's a lot you can do with it. But I don't think this was, like, the best DC movie I've seen, the best superhero movie I've seen. Like, I think maybe some comics pull this kind of thing off better. So I think that it was better than middle of the road, but it was not perfect for me.
Mm-hmm. Well, that's that. I am deeply satisfied that I've finally seen Shazam. I was excited to see it, and I'm glad that I waited to the holidays to watch it, as it is a non-holiday holiday movie, or a holiday non-movie, I guess.
I don't think that what you just said was correct.
Because I guess like a holiday theme would be family, Is that
yeah?
what
Well, it's kind of like
it's all about?
It's kind of like how we were talking about how Chuck does this, where it's like it has the themes of Christmas / the holidays, but it's not like overtly
beating you over the head with it.
Yeah, like Santa is there, but
he's there. Oh, he's there. Trust me.
He's there. He's the eighth sin or the eighth Shazam child.
Kind of. I mean, if you think about Shazam the Wizard, it's kind of like Santa.
Yeah.
But also, there's gift giving because Shazam gives his siblings the gift of being a superheroes. That's also something that I don't particularly. I'm just concerned that I like that plot point, but I think that introducing it in a first movie of a first superhero character, like what Shazam 2 is like, it's not really. Yeah, it could be Shazam 2, but you really have. It's not just about Shazam anymore. It's about a super team of characters.
Well, I'm still not sure. If anyone is very familiar with Shazam lore and can tell us more about this, we'd be happy to like give an update maybe later or maybe not.
I mean, they're all the secondary Shazams are not all of them, but like they are canonical of like there's Shazam Jr., which is allegedly Freddy's character's alter ego.
Okay.
Lady Shazam was Mary, the college-age girl's Shazam. So there's characters that exist in the comics that I assume that they will continue on, but who knows?
Who knows?
Anyhow, thank you for joining us on this discussion of Shazam. I hope you enjoyed it. I hope you enjoyed Shazam the movie if you watched it. We will be getting ready for season 3 of Chuck coming out in late January or early February. But before that, we will be coming back with a special episode about the Save Chuck movement, which took place in between seasons 2 and season 3 of Chuck. I'm really looking forward to it. I think it's going to be fun. It's going to be different. And yeah. Is there anything else you'd like to say, Erin?
Thank you for listening and happy holidays. Whatever you're celebrating, whether it be family, Christmas, Hanukkah, Kwanzaa, etc., etc.
Or maybe just the new year.
I am from my heart to yours. Happy times.
Signing off for Go Shazam Yourself, my name is Chris Gillespie, reminding you that food is sexy.
And my name is Erin Arata, letting you know that if a superhero can't save his family, he's not much of a hero.
Just say the word.
Shazam!
Shazam! All right, bye.
Now we're adults.
Thanks for listening. Special thanks to freemusicarchive.org and the artist Hadakoa for providing us with our theme song, Warm Up. Make sure to email us at gochuckyourselfpodcast@gmail.com and tweet at us at gochuckpodcast. Remember to like and subscribe to our show on Apple Podcasts and write a review if that's something you need to do. We'll see you next week. Bye-bye.